Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Shadow of Kyoshi chapter analysis video. This one's going to be for chapter 24, which is called Home Again. So this is the chapter where we get the big Kyoshi versus Yoon fight. It comes to an end. It's one of the longer chapters in the book, and this brings the threat within the book to an end, and it leaves the last two chapters to be the ending basically of the book. So this chapter has a lot to do. So it has a lot of setup and a lot of characters come back in this chapter. But it's also the chapter where I think this really is where I'd bring up. This book is 100 pages shorter than the first book, The Rise of Kyoshi. Because they basically just immediately establish, like straight away, a month has passed. And this is when this confrontation is taking place. And as the chapter goes on, and we learn about, oh, this character's back, this this is what Kyoshi has learned in that time. A lot of stuff has happened in this month, and they don't cover it. And I can appreciate that to a certain degree, because you want to have it be a little bit of a surprise and just have it be brought up as the plan is executed. But in a book that I don't feel like we get a ton of resolution to even stuff that went on within this book, the sudden switch from the end of the vision, Yoon's interlude, to a month later feels very sudden to me. And it's the one part in the book where it just feels like they've skipped over a lot of important stuff. In a book that the entire first third of this book is set up before we even get into the plot, for them to really skip over a lot of setup for the final bit feels kind of weird to me. In that you realize that, oh yeah, we haven't seen Rangi in like 100 pages in this book. Like nearly a third of the book, Rangi's been out, because it was a bunch of chapters ago at this point where Kyoshi left Rangi behind as she went off to get Huazo and Cheijin to go too far on her plan, basically. And it seemed like, okay, Kyoshi had made a mistake, but Rangi forgives her. Now here's Kyoshi doing something that Rangi won't like again. There's no way she's going to forgive her this time. And they never bring it up. They never bring up any sort of like discussion about what just happened, like Kyoshi leaving on Jinpa's bison to kidnap people, and Rangi's thoughts on that. I get there's a lot of stuff happening here right towards the end of the book, but I really think you needed to establish, the forgiveness scene there between the two of them. Similarly, this chapter reintroduces Kirima and Wong back into the story. I would have loved to have seen that reunion and just get some establishment stuff before we go into this fight. And they also established that she spent most of this month training with Ottawat to do healing and stuff like that. Show that a bit more, because again, Ottawat's been out of action in the book for a while as well. The same with Heiron. Like, I don't think Heiron is even in the book for like the whole rest of it, as far as I'm aware. So there's little things like that I feel just like this is just kind of almost like just missing from the book. And it's a 2-book series. Like, there's no third book coming. Like, where was the reunion with Rangi? Where was the, ending, any sense of ending to, like, Heiron's arc and what they're doing there? Especially after we just learned the truth about Karuk, and that there's, like, a tease of a romance between Karuk and Heiron. Like, we're not going to get anyone else's reaction to Karuk's, what happened to Karuk. Given that, like, Heiron is the last surviving member of Karuk's companions, like, Kyoshi isn't even going to tell her this and get a reaction either way. That seems weird. The same with kind of Nyata. Like I think it would have been so important to have a scene with like Heiron, Nyata, and Kyoshi to just bring this all back together. But they don't. And this is when I talked about it in my reviews before getting into these chapter analysis videos. Like, I think this is the point at which like I'd be critical of like just the general sort of ending of the book. Not because of specifically anything that happens in this book, but more because of like what doesn't happen. They skip over a month. This is the last chapter of like action, basically. And then there's only 2 chapters left in the book to act as the sort of aftermath and then epilogue to the entire 2-book series. And they just don't give themselves enough time, because this book's 100 pages shorter than the previous one. Well, let's get into it here. So Kyoshi arrives back at Yokoya because, of course, it had to be Yokoya. This had to be where the two of them had their confrontation. This is the Avatar mansion between the false Avatar, the actual Avatar, it was always going to happen here. Jonju's mansion, this is where the legacies would clash once again. And of course they can both sense where each other are. This is where they were both drawn to after Yun had done his healing after the injury at Heiron's hands, and Kyoshi had done her healing training. So that's what we get. She arrives back on Yokoya. She makes her way back up to the mansion. She notices that everyone's sort of no one's really coming out of their houses. She's glad she doesn't encounter any of the other villagers on her way up. And yeah, as she gets to the gates of the mansion, there's a message for her written in pebbles. I'm inside. So as she walks inside, she finds that it's just two people there. It's Yun and it's Auntie Mui. And obviously Yun hasn't revealed himself to be like evil as such at this point to everyone, so Mui is just so happy to have, her boy and her girl back together again in the same house. Like it's all coming back together. She cares for these two, and she's happy that they're both like alive again, and they're both finally home. And so they're like, yeah, we're gonna have a big meal together, whatever you guys want. And so Kyoshi's just like, okay, Mui, get me some stalk nose mushrooms. And this is a great reference because this was the crop that was not available back in the Fire Nation because stuff hadn't been going well with the crops. So she knows Mui won't be able to get this in any at all. So this takes Mui out of the way, leaving Kyoshi and Yun one-on-one in the mansion to have their talk finally. And yeah, this is it. So he immediately opens up with, so what have you been doing for the past few weeks? Mastering the avatar state or some other secret fighting technique you wanted to use against me? I was learning healing. My teacher says I'm the fastest study she's ever seen. And he's like, are you here to look at my arm then? But no, it's already kind of healed enough. And this is where we get down to it. No, Yun, I'm here to put you away. You can't be allowed to show your face in public again. Zoryu has managed to contain the damage you've done in the Fire Nation, but if you resurface now, the country would fall apart. And here's where she realizes there's going to be no negotiating with him. There's going to be no convincing him to do anything different. He says, so? I don't care about that anymore. And the beautiful thing is I don't have to. I used to have to negotiate, accommodate, bend over backward to make people happy, but those days are over. You know what I spent the last few weeks doing while I recovered from my injury? I thought about all the liars and backstabbers I've met across the 4 nations, who kissed my feet when I was the Avatar. And I realized that I could kill them all. Not an exaggeration, with enough time I truly think I could actually kill them all. I know their names, I know how they're connected, most important, I know why they would deserve it. And this is where she realizes that she'd hoped she'd be able to talk some sense into him, but it's not going to happen. Yun's rampage was never going to end with Jonju and Heiron and Liu. In his eyes, the whole world had wronged him. He wasn't trying to balance the scales with his killings. He was trying to smash the device into bits. So this is where she realized she has to stand against him here. It has to be a fight. There's no discussion, negotiation. It's going to have to be friend versus friend here. It's going to have to be sort of Karuk versus Glowworm round 2, but in new forms here. So she drew her fans. I didn't say you had a choice. So yeah, that's the fight begins after this point. So Yun opens it up, and this is where you really get just how powerful he is. This chapter is an exploration of the extent to which Yun is just insanely powerful now with the power of Glowworm. They basically just get across the idea that he literally just goes like this, and a huge column of earth just comes up straight through the floor of the mansion, and he's like, we're going to use this to fight with. So he does basically sort of a similar type move to the one Kyoshi does back on the iceberg, of just bringing the earth into the mansion for them to use. And just immediately the two of them burst into action. Both earthbenders they start hammering away on this giant column of earth, sending, boulders flying at each other. They're barely aiming at all, such as the power and speed that they're going at each other. They all manage to avoid everything. Kyoshi brings the exchange to an end, where she knocks the entire column down on him. But Yun manages to, of course, get out of the way. Because, of course, as we've seen before, he can just sort of like dive into the floor. He could do anything he wants with earth, basically. So she follows him sort of through the mansion. As she goes through the corridors, he's sending these like spikes of earth through the walls that she's barely, blocking and dodging and so on. They're both sort of noting each other's strength while they're having a bit of a back and forth. Hey now, you know how I never liked you going into my room? And Kyoshi says, and then I never did, not even after I took over the house. Thank you, it's the smallest kindnesses that mean the most. As she airbends at him, of course, and he notes that, you're finally using the other elements against me. I was wondering when that was going to happen. And yeah, this is where she tries once again to convince him, but this ends up being something that just enrages him even more. This is something that gets him even more into the fight here. She says, Yun, can I tell you something? It's time to let go. Whether you kill me here today or not, you have to let go of what happened. And he's like, let go? Let go? You have the gall to say that after helping me kill Janju? You got exactly what you wanted, Kyoshi. And she says, and it didn't bring me peace. It was wrong that you were lied to, Yoon. It was wrong for Janju to do what he did. But he's gone. Whatever pain and anger you have left, you have to live with it. You can't put it on anyone else. You don't deserve to hurt more people because of what you suffered, Yoon. You don't deserve to hurt me. And he obviously is taking great offense to this, of like, you are telling me to just let the rest of this be. He can't believe she said this to him. He has taken such insult to this. But she's correct here. Like, if there's any sense of him being reasonable here, this might be able to get through to him. But this is where it fully is, she has to fully realize there's no coming back from this. So he says, oh, Kyoshi, you've got it all wrong. And this is when he just... He begins to like increase his power at this point. So he manages to contain Kyoshi here with this amazing move. And Kyoshi's convinced that, like, what did he just do? How am I contained in this earth? It was like he used water bending here. But the reveal here is that he has managed to liquefy the stone around them and basically use earth like it was water. And he's completely contained her here in this earth. So he has her completely just, he's won the fight here at this point, basically. Because this is not just some standard earth-bending thing where you've contained someone in earth. Because it was liquid when it covered her and then he solidified it, she's completely, like, still here. There's nothing she can do against this. It's so powerful here. It's absolutely incredible. He liquefied the stone floor of the courtyard and sent it crashing over her. He'd melted the rock without heat. Yun's earthbending skill was such that he could treat his native element like water. And he says, I can't believe you think I would ever hurt you. You, the one innocent party in this whole affair. I would never hurt you, Kyoshi. For Yang Chen's sake, I used to be your whole life. I know what's happening here. Your duties have gotten to you, haven't they? I remember what it was like carrying the weight of the four nations on my shoulders. Janju used to liken them to unruly students in a classroom, requiring the guidance of a strong hand. I used to believe it meant showing the way, leading by example. Now I know better. The world is a child refusing to listen, screaming in tantrum. It needs to be slapped a few times until it learns to be quiet. So that's his view on things, and he's just like, I don't blame you, Kyoshi. I don't want to hurt you. You're innocent in this as well. He still fully hasn't been able to, come at her with that, vengeance he has for everyone else. Even though we know, she knows. He deep down knows, but hasn't fully said it yet. That the reason he's not the Avatar is because of Kyoshi. So he's sort of still defending her here of just like, the reason you're this way is because this is the duty of the Avatar. It's gotten to you, hasn't it? And he obviously has complete control over here. He throws her fans away, and it's just like, and he looks at the scar on her neck from right at the start of the book. See, this is what I'm talking about. Look at what you suffered for the sake of duty. They forced you to hide in this shell. They turned you from a gentle girl into a walking terror. Avatarhood is a curse. Look how it's made you treat me, your oldest, truest friend. And Kyoshi just had to reply to him that, I wear these clothes because I choose to. These marks are who I am. And I have friends much truer than you. Which is when Kirima, Wong, Jimpa's flying above as well as Rangi arrive on the scene. to help her out. So they quickly create a bit of a distraction. Wong manages to, with his control over earthbending, crack her out of the sort of solidified liquid earth. So she's back in the fight as well. Kirima nearly gets, taken out by Yun here, but she does manage to dodge it because, of course, the dust stepping and misstepping techniques that they have mean that they're able to be, very evasive and stay in the air away from him. So even though he's incredibly powerful, their movement techniques are sort of allowing them to stay within the fight. Rangi arrives on the scene, and there's a big power boost as she arrives on the scene. She nearly takes him out straight away. She's here. And he just notes, are these them, the Dao Fei you've been running with, the scum you're calling companions nowadays? And the Kirima and Wong are just like, we don't socialize enough to really be like her companions, but like, fine. And it's noted in the narration that like, she had sent what was it, Lao Ge, was it, to no, she had sent Jinpa to get Rangi and the others. Lao Ge hadn't shown up, but she had also sent a lot of money to Kirima and Wong to get them here. So they're here because they're Kyoshi's allies, but also because she paid them as well. So that's just that dynamic there. That's how it works, of course. This is when Kirima and Wong seemingly get the advantage on Yun. Kirima sends a huge blast of water at him. Yun puts a defense right up. It's going to block it, but then Wong at the last seconds puts up an earth sort of a barrier in front of her blast and redirects it. So it kind of goes around Yun's defenses and like sweeps him off his feet with the big blast of water. And as he hits the ground, Kyoshi's preparing to like trap him in earth, but Yun is the master earthbender here. He's the best earthbender like we've ever seen, kind of almost. So he just immediately breaks out of Kyoshi's attempt to do this, and so this big move has really just, we knocked him off his feet once. And he says, the earth is my element. I was just letting other people borrow it sometimes. Just a perfect display of his skill. And at the same time, as he like stands up and is saying this, Wong is preparing this giant like attack from behind him. He's getting these huge pillars of earth behind you and ready to crash them down on him. And he just stands there as it happens. He knows it's right behind him. But as they come down to smash into him, he basically just goes like that. He like just moves his shoulders back and basically lets the earth sort of just explode off him. Like he just has control over an attack someone else is doing and just lets it kind of run off him. That's how much control he has, that this move can't even do a thing. This is when Rangi does her big move. They establish that she does some super deep breaths, amazing breathing control here, and just does it multiple times. She leaves herself wide open. Kyoshi notes that like she's not like putting all of her power out, she's almost like containing it inwards. And then it says here, upon her third pulsing charging breath, she lunged, releasing a flame so intense it nearly turned from yellow to white. It was pure avenging wrath given solidity. And it's not just a blast that she sends out. She then sort of controls it. It sort of like follows Yun for a little bit, but he is able to get out of the way because he's in control of the earth. He is the earth, almost, the way they describe him. He's able to escape it, but he does note that like, whoa, that was a fire blast. Like, you're playing for keeps. I guess I should too. Revealing that he has not been using the full extent of his power. And so everyone notes when he takes a proper earthbending stance that like he hasn't done that the entire fight. And Kyoshi notes she's never seen Yun do a sort of more beginner standard earthbending stance. What is going to happen here? And so he goes into Jonju's stance, which is the it's the wide stance on the bottom, connected to the earth, legs not moving, but the top, everything going on. Lots of motion with his arms and waist and stuff like that, hips, but fundamentally keeping his legs still and connected into the ground. So this is him sort of at his most powerful as an earthbender, deeply connected to the ground, in control of everything around him. A lot of motion with his hands. He swung his fist, snapping with his waist, and the earth began to violently twist back and forth. Kyoshi and Rangi were thrown off their feet. The solid ground pulled out from underneath them. The sturdy foundations of the mansion wobbled like jelly. Yun's stance was low and wide, but his arms were as loose as rope darts as he painted his destruction. It was Jeonju's personal style of earthbending, warped to liquefy and annihilate the stone instead of constructing from it. Around them, walls folded in on themselves, sucking downwards in a groan of tearing wood as if the house had been built on quicksand instead of bedrock. So he is just turning solid platforms of earth and is just toying with them. They're just immediately like either being liquefied, or he's creating this sort of local sort of earthquake thing. He's making the ground just not solid anymore. No one has stable footing. And it's noted that this sudden shift, even Kirima and Wong are losing their vaunted balance. And so they take a hard slam into the ground as they fall off the roof here, because of course he's making the structures around them also kind of vibrate and stuff like that. This is when he turns his attention to Jinpa and just it says here, Yun raised a hedge of stone spears. A nightmare's memory of Kelsong gliding over the iceberg spread across Kyoshi's vision. So Jinpa realizes what's going to happen, and instead of dodging it in some way, he knows he's going to get hit by some of these things. So instead of having Yin Yang get injured again, what he does is he turns the saddle towards the hit, so that Yin Yang's not going to get hit much. It's going to be him. And so most of them just go into the saddle, but Jinpa takes a spear straight through the shoulder, and so he's like attached to the saddle as he kind of goes unconscious. Yin Yang sort of flees the battle at this point, so this is Jinpa taken out of action. And Jinpa was primarily just there hovering above to basically take anyone if they got injured out of the battle before they could be like killed or anything. So this is Jinpa gone straight away. Kirima and Wong recover from their falls, and then immediately go kind of rushing after Yun. The ground is vibrating, but they've got great balance, of course, so they sort of like sprint to confront Yun. But he, in such control over the ground, does this. Where does it say here? Yun didn't turn his head. You've left yourself so vulnerable. He hammered his fists down. Cracks parted underneath the oldest members of the Flying Opera Company, neatly placed pitfalls that swallowed them up to their knees. There was a pair of sickening crunches as their own momentum broke their legs. They let out brief screams before clamping their mouths shut, unwilling to give Yun the satisfaction of hearing their pain. So that is just absolutely brutal. Like, they're just running along the ground, and he just goes boom into the ground, and immediately, like, their like whole lower limb just like falls into the ground, and their upper body is still moving that fast, and they just completely crack their legs. Really, really brutal. Like, you'd never see something like that happen in the show. Even Korra, it was willing to do a little bit more with that stuff, would never have done something like this. So in just 2 quick moves, Jinpa's out of action, Wong's out of action, Kirima's out of action. And so this is where it's left with it's Kyoshi and Rangi versus Yun. So this is what they've been waiting for here. And Rangi says, Kyoshi, do you remember what I tried to teach you so many times since Governor Tae's, and you could never do it? I think you have to do it now. So this is where they both realize that, okay, this is what they have to do. So Yun does hit them. He basically gets some earthbending discs and smashes them into Kyoshi and Rangi's faces, so they're kind of bleeding at this point, but they're not badly injured like the others are. So they use their blood to put on their faces, their Daofei faces. And I love the description here. Rangi pressed her palm to her bleeding lips and swiped a crimson bar down her chin. It was the most distinctive mark of a benevolent river spirit worshipped in Zhonghui. The same design Rangi had chosen, the first and only time she'd ever worn the Flying Opera Company's colors. Kyoshi gathered the blood streaming from her nose with her fingers. She closed her eyes and dragged the crude red streaks across them, tapering back over her ears. It was a far cry from her normal makeup, the fine oil-based stuff from Ba Sing Se, but it would do. So once again, they're wearing white and red again. Rangi with her sort of Fire Nation, painted lady style makeup, and Kyoshi with just sort of blood across like her face like that. It's a nice look, and like, of course, this is why they were losing. They weren't wearing their faces. So this is going to be Kyoshi Rangi team up. Will this be the thing to take him out? And Yun notices this. He's like, Ah, I remember Chin Chao. You showed a face like that to Jeonju once. And now I'm showing it to you, of course. As Kyoshi reveals she can now do the jet stepping technique. So Rangi's form of dust stepping, she can do it now. And this is the counter to what Yoon has been doing. Yoon has been dominating the battlefield since he switched stances because he's had complete control of the ground. Anyone who needs to plant their feet on the ground is at risk of being absolutely annihilated by Yoon. But with jet stepping, you're just firebending on your feet. So it keeps them off the ground, and Yoon has to do a lot more to try and hit them out of the air than he does to just plant them into the ground. So together they're both sort of, jet stepping here. Kyoshi slams into Yoon here, stomach, shoulder right into stomach here. She nearly distracts him enough that Rangi, who's kind of hovering a little bit higher, hits him with some big fireballs that she's sending from the air. This is where it seems like Kyoshi, then has an opportunity as Yoon is dodging those to create a big fire blast of her own. But Yoon dodges. But this is the big combo move here. Rangi acted faster and better than them both. From her higher vantage point, she spun her arms in a circle, mimicking a waterbender, redirecting the flame Kyoshi had put into the world. Kyoshi saw her fireball change course behind Yoon like the orbit of a comet and come around for a second pass. Caught off guard again, the barrier Yoon raised at the last second wasn't as thick as he needed it to be. It exploded under the weight of the flame, but there was a burst of blinding light. Smoke and dust flew everywhere. So it seems like together they have managed to deliver a devastating blow to Yoon. But then Rangi's like, Kyoshi, he can tunnel. Yoon rose up behind her, carried by a rising mound of soil like a waterspout, and drove his hand into the small of Rangi's back. So we cut scene at this point. Rangi's just been delivered a devastating blow here, and she just collapses out of the sky. She'd been like jet stepping into the air. She falls out of the sky here onto the ground. Kyoshi does catch her, so she saves her from a heavy impact with the ground, and she notes that her back was wet with blood. Yoon had stabbed her with a spike of earth, like the one he'd used on her mother, angling the puncture wound beneath her armor. So this is a great moment because you'd think, surely Avatar state here. Rangi's just gone down. It says here, Kyoshi shut her eyes. She knew she opened them, light would shine forth. The elements would flow through her, and her bending would rage unstoppably until she was left victorious, the last person standing. 1,000 voices told her so. It had been decided long before she was born that the power was adequate compensation for losing what she most held dear. So this is the issue with the Avatar state. If she goes into it here, she'd probably be able to beat Yoon, but she would probably kill Rangi and the others for good because it would devastate the area around them. Because let's not forget that that's basically what happened when Kelsang was killed. And Kyoshi still sort of blames herself for she's pretty sure she destroyed his body in the aftermath of what happened there. Such was the damage she did to the environment in that moment. And she doesn't want that to happen here with Rangi, that she's upset that she's been injured here. But if she falls to the Avatar state here, it would win her the day, but it would lose her everyone around her. So she has to contain herself here. What if Rangi was taken from her? She would no longer be Kyoshi. She would no longer be human. She would be forever on the other side of the rift, among the swirling colors of the void she glimpsed in the spirit world, watching humans from afar, a terrible and alien presence. So that if she falls to the despair of this apparent loss of Rangi, she's also going to be like Yoon with a wound that will never be able to close, basically. So Rangi speaks, "Stay here with me." And this is when Kyoshi realizes what she needs to do. She finally needs to talk and tell Yoon what he wants to hear. This is going to be the one thing that will actually distract him, get through to him, and she needs to say this. The one thing they haven't really addressed this whole conversation, because Yoon has already said, "You're innocent in this. Why would I want to hurt you?" And even up to now, he's attacked everyone. He's hurt everyone else, like breaking their legs, stabbing them in some way, but not Kyoshi. He's contained her in liquid earth and stuff like that, but he hasn't actually moved to kill her when it's clear that he could probably any minute he wants to. So This is what she says. "I'm sorry." Kyoshi whispered softly under her breath. "I'm sorry I stole your avatar hood." And he's like, You have to speak up. So he comes up closer to her. "It was yours and I took it from you." So she keeps her voice very low, so he still has to come closer to her. "I'm sorry I robbed you of everything, Yoon. I'm sorry I stole your future. I regret everything. I regret what I did to you so much." And he's like, "Good. That's good to hear. What else are you sorry for, Kyoshi? Maybe you should apologize for what you said to me earlier, telling me I should just forget what happened. That was a terrible thing for you to say. I'm sorry for saying you had to live with your pain." Kyoshi put a palm to his chest in a gesture of comfort. "Because you won't." The cold she sent through his body formed a tunnel of ice between his ribs. It happened so fast and with so much force, the moisture in the air behind him turned to frost. His back sprouted vaporous wings of crystal that disappeared just as quickly. With his heart and lungs frozen solid, Yun fell to the side. Kyoshi took the hand with which she killed one of the two people she loved and placed it against the wound of the other. Water. She needed more water. Her tears of light weren't enough. So this is how the fight comes to an end. She uses the technique that was basically set up like right towards the start of the book in the aftermath of Yoon's first attack. Otuat using this technique to sort of cool the body of someone down to allow transport and time for emergency like surgery or whatever. But she also said that if someone applies this technique with the right amount of power but not the right amount of control, you'll just freeze someone and kill them immediately. So Kyoshi, having trained under Otuat, the implication is that she knows how to do this technique properly, I guess, but that she purposefully here uses this as like an instant kill technique on him. That just in touching him, the only thing that can possibly take him out immediately is this technique. And the technique that he allows her to touch him because she's finally giving him what he wants. Finally, she is apologizing for taking this away from me. That's what fundamentally this was all about. That notice how like almost all of these incidents, they may not have been targeting Kyoshi, but Kyoshi was there in all of these scenes. All these moments affected Kyoshi in some way because she was in that scene, not able to help people or whatever. That like even if Yoon himself didn't realize it, he was hurting Kyoshi this whole time. And he couldn't realize it himself because he was still calling her the one who's innocent in all of this. But that deep down, this is what he wanted. He wanted an apology from Kyoshi for being the one to take everything away from him. But, you know, I suppose the question is like, almost like, was he then going to turn on her and actually go to kill her if she didn't act when she did? This is her opening. If she doesn't take this, like, he could just attack her again and go after her. So she had to do it. And I really like that she's finally actually kind of gotten through to him in a way. He's talking about things, but she knows what he said earlier on, that his list is growing. He thinks he has the time to kill everyone involved in this lie. And ultimately, she's now admitted to being involved herself. Is he reasonable enough to not include her on the list? The answer realistically is no. So that's what I really love about that. I mean, that you can tell that even though he's like, good, you know, you said sorry for this, he still is beginning to get annoyed at her, you know, telling me I should just forget what happened. That was a terrible thing for you to say. That her just trying to get through to him, that would have potentially been enough of a slight for him to go over the edge and actively try to kill Kyoshi now. So it's her one opportunity, and she takes it here with a great technique set up here, the only way to properly take him out for good, because it was clear she was never going to be able to beat him in a one-on-one bending fight. Like, he was just so powerful. He had the scale of earth bending, the control of earth bending, the skill, the assassination skills, the ability to kill whenever he wanted to. It was like 5-on-1 there. Very powerful benders involved. He still was in complete control. So she did what she had to do. But we continue here. So this is where she realizes she needs water to heal Rangi now that the fight is over. So she finally uses the avatar state here. And they note here, she nearly laughed at perhaps the most underwhelming use of the avatar state in history. And it's literally just that she uses the avatar state to pull up some water from the water supply of the mansion, because they're sort of they're kind of like far away from it here, so she can't just water bend and grab it because it's far enough away. So it's just turning on the avatar state to have a like further away connection to water, and it's just to get enough water bending to do some healing. And she brings it over and starts to heal Rangi. So just, she says here, but this was better in her mind. Healing was better than destruction. The water coated her hand and began to glow. So this is the level up from the very start of the book. Kyoshi could do healing, but she couldn't make the water glow. Now she can. So the training with Ottawat has worked. She has finally learned actual proper healing, and she's healing Rangi here. She had to reduce her power as much as she could in order to not damage Rangi further, but there was no more fear in Kyoshi's heart. She would be her own miracle this time. We could see, and Rangi does indeed open her eyes. She's going to be okay, but Kyoshi sort of notes that, like, Ottawat is on her way. I've managed to sort of stabilize you, but there could be lasting damage, so we need to wait for her to get here. She's managed to sort of immobilize their legs, Kirama and Wong's legs, but she hasn't been able to sort of treat them yet because she's had to focus on Jinpa and Rangi, who are the more grievously injured ones because they suffered stab wounds, basically, whereas, leg breaks are bad, of course, but not as bad as what's happened to those two. So we get a little bit of complaining here, back and forth about this, but, Ottawat is on the way. So then we get this idea here of, like, just Rangi, like, is it over? Is Yoon gone? And she's like, yes, it's over. Rangi cupped her hands over her face. She sniffed, sharp little noises ringing in her palms. Kyoshi pressed her forehead to Rangi's, and together they cried for their friend. So, nice ending to the chapter there with just the acknowledgement of, like, that now that it's over, like, they just accept, like, they've had to kill their friend. That the discussions throughout this whole book about, like, no, what Yoon has done, we have to fight him, we have to go after him, we'll have to take him out. Kyoshi, why haven't you done what you've done? Why haven't you been able to fight against him? And it's because of this. Because if they did do that, if they did take him out, they'd have to deal with this. The fact that they'd ultimately realize in the end they've had to kill their friend, which is what's happened here. That she's just healed Rangi and the others after their fight with Yoon, in which Kyoshi has had to directly kill Yoon because there was no way to save him whatsoever. He wasn't under the control of a spirit. He was actually sort of in control of a spirit himself, which is why he was so powerful. She had to take him out. And that's a very brutal way to end this. Like, Kyoshi could accept what she had to do to Zhu Ping on. That's the, only justice can bring peace, that there are some people who just do need to be taken out. But the whole point of this book was, in a way, getting Kyoshi to the point. Can you take that same philosophy with that person if that person was a friend of yours? That's why a lot of characters brought up the idea of you're lost in the past. You can only view Yoon as the person he used to be and not the person that he is now. You have to get out of that mentality, out of the excuses that he's being controlled by a spirit, and just accept that it's him. He is the villain in this situation, and you will have to take him out. And Yoon ultimately left her no options, and she took the one opportunity that she had. And it's this proof that Kyoshi is willing to do what needs to be done. And this explains, the character who, even though she had the out with the whole Chin the Conqueror thing, but it was just an accident, he just stood there, I would have done it anyway. It's because she's been through the situation with Zhu, the situation here, everything. It all comes to a head with that. So, yeah, that's the chapter. So, yeah, like I said, I think this chapter itself is very, very good. The only weaknesses I think I would have with it is just that it is Rangi, like, returning after the last time we've seen her in the book, being her, like, in tears as Kyoshi has just left to kidnap people, and they never acknowledge, like, what the deal is with that, or anything like that. So it's kind of, that feels a bit weird to me. Like, obviously, like, Rangi is in, she is in the next chapter for a little bit at least, isn't it? I think so, anyway. Yeah. There's a little bit more, yeah, at the start of the next chapter. But, like, fundamentally, they don't address what happened in between. That, like, this month, Kyoshi, when was the last time she talked to Rangi? That I don't like that vagueness surrounding a lot of that stuff of, like, no mention of Heiran in the last month, and so on, just that she trained with Otuat. So clearly she was around Otuat, I guess, and Heiran and Rangi. But I would have liked to have seen that. And it just feels like, for some reason, in the transition between the Karuk backstory, the Yun backstory, into the rest of the book, the decision was made to just, like, accelerate the story very suddenly into the final fight. Which I get you had set up for the last few chapters. We had to get here eventually. You couldn't do too much in between. But now it feels like there's almost like a little bit of a section of the story that's just missing. And they only are really getting around it by basically explaining, well, it was part of the plan. We had to have the tease of, the surprise reveal of Kirima and Wong and Rangi arriving on the battlefield, and it's fine. And I think the other thing is just that, like, I think the next chapter, as good as it is, and we'll get to that in the next video, I think it probably also could have had more resolution stuff with the other characters, because the epilogue is a very sort of separate thing that I'll talk about when we get to it. So the next chapter is effectively still the last chapter of the book, more or less. And it is the one that kind of has to do the last things in the story. Like the last time for Kyoshi Rangi to talk. The last time for any of the other characters in the book to really talk to each other. Because the last chapter of the book is separate. The epilogue is. So, it's just one of those things where, like, the chapter that we have here is great, but it is also sort of representative of some of the stuff towards the end of the book that the book didn't execute on perfectly. And it's, again, one of the only real weaknesses I think I have with the book, but we'll talk about that more when we get to the final few chapters as well. But yes, that has been my thoughts on this chapter. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were, but that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.